Welcome to Reaching Out. I'm Gregory Floyd, President, Local 237 Teamsters. Joining us once again is the esteemed borough president from the borough of the Bronx, Ruben Diaz, Jr. Welcome back to Reaching Out.
Thank you. Thank you for having me once again. It's always a pleasure to be here.
It's always a pleasure to have you. You are one of the rising stars in politics in our city. I've watched you since you came in, and as I could tell you, I'm very proud of you. And thank you once again for coming on, Reaching Out. Let's talk about the brighter future that you've, over the last 4 years, created for the Bronx.
I think the Bronx is right there at the cusp of really booming in a and we have been booming. In fact, Greg, earlier last month, I had my State of the Borough address, and it was my 4th annual address, and it was there that I coined the term the New Bronx. And people need to come and experience the New Bronx. And I appreciate this opportunity that you're giving me here because a lot of folks still look at the Bronx as the way it used to be back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when I was a teenager. We all know, but that's behind us. We all know the images of the Bronx. That's all behind us. The reality is that just in the last 4 years alone, there's been over $5 billion in private investment in the Bronx. There's been over $700 million in housing in the Bronx, all kind of housing, new housing. And it's been all done in a sustainable, green way. Just last year, the numbers show that while, yes, the rest of the city's crime levels have gone down, usually whenever the city's going in the right direction in one area, it's not the same for the Bronx. But I'm proud to say that since 1963, we have seen record lows in all major crimes: homicides, shooting incidents, shooting victims, grand larceny, all those statistics, the lowest they've ever been since 1963. We've been doing a lot of good work around education. And so what I wanted to convey to everyone is, look, we're no longer going to tolerate the negative stereotypes. We're no longer going to tolerate people, wanting to write the Bronx off. It's a new day. We have great restaurants. We have a great nightlife. We have wonderful cultural institutions. And people need to experience and discover the New Bronx once again.
Tell us, you mentioned restaurants.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to ask you the best one because we're not going to get you in trouble.
Don't get me in trouble now.
But name an area in the Bronx where people could go and choose from at least, I would say, 5 different restaurants.
That's one of the reasons why I say it's the New Bronx. We used to be the borough where if you wanted to go to a good restaurant, everyone always say Arthur Avenue, Little Italy in the Bronx. And there's still wonderful restaurants there, right?
Yes.
Or they say City Island. But now, if you look at different corridors in our borough, so if you go on Tremont Avenue by Throsneck, there's so many different places, and the type of cuisine that we have. This is the reason why Epicureans from all over the planet are starting to come to our borough. In fact, this year we just celebrated our 2nd annual Savor the Bronx. So when you look at the city of New York, there's always a restaurant week. Yes. There's one in Brooklyn. There's one in New York City. There's never been one in the Bronx. Last year we started it, and 2 years ago we started it. Last year we had our 2nd annual Bronx week. We call it Savor the Bronx, and it's a way for us to really showcase the diversity in cuisine, how tasty it is, and the fancy places. The ambiance that you can enjoy in the borough of the Bronx, so that you don't just have to look at Manhattan to find a great place to eat or a legendary place to eat. We have so many of those right in the beautiful borough of the Bronx.
Now, so much has been made about gun control. I mean, I know I'm for gun control. I've always been for gun control. I know you have your version of gun control, and the Bronx, it used to be known as Gun Hill Road. Let's put it this way. Gun Hill Road was known for its name, Gun Hill Road. Mm-hmm. But what is your vision of gun control?
Well, this is an issue that's on everybody's lips, from the President of the United States on down. And the reality is that whether you're talking about the South Bronx or Sandy Hook, this is something that's really touched everyone's lives, right? From Katrona Park, yes, to Columbine. It's everywhere. It's not only happening in the inner cities, but look at Gabby Giffords, the congresswoman who was having a talk out in front of a shopping strip, and so everyone is starting to realize that in the United States, we have a problem. We have a mental illness as it pertains to gun violence. This is a sickness that we need to stop. and that we need to deal with in a serious way. And so we've been supportive of legislation. I continue to support the president and the governor on assault weapons ban. But handguns are a problem also, Greg.
Yes, yeah.
You know,
yeah,
and,
sure.
And how many you could buy at a particular time, that's an issue. Whether or
and
not
the ammunition you could buy.
the amount of ammunition, yes. Whether or not you should be drug tested is something that I support. There should be drug testing. Obviously, there should be a psychological evaluation for those who have application for a weapon, for a handgun. We should also look to see whether or not somebody has a criminal history, but not just a felonious background, but even a misdemeanor. You know, someone could get arrested for a violent misdemeanor and still be eligible to obtain a gun license. I think that that's something that's pretty absurd. We've in the Bronx, we've been doing things like Peace in Our Streets initiative, where we knock on doors and we tell people to call 866 Gun Stop, which is an anonymous call. It's a hotline you call anonymously, and if it results in a confiscation of a weapon, an illegal weapon, you get $1,000. 866 Gun Stop. This is something that when you look at the Bronx, since we started this initiative with clergy, calls have increased. More guns than ever have been confiscated, and the amount of money that has been given out has increased as well. We do gun buyback programs, but I in the State of the Borough address, I also introduced something outside the box, something different, and that's what we call the gun crime registry.
Now, what you just mentioned, background investigations, psychologicals,
limitation on how many weapons and ammunition. Yep.
Now our police officers have to go through background investigations. They have to go through psychologicals. We just don't hand firearms to our police officers.
Right.
So why would we just hand firearms to our citizens? That's something to think about.
When I was in the New York State Assembly, so before being the borough president, I was in the New York State Assembly, and we have always had tough gun control and gun reform laws in the state of New York. And we need to applaud the state legislature for moving so swiftly earlier this year in passing even tougher laws. The problem becomes is that the people buy these weapons in Virginia, South Carolina, other states, and they bring them in, and they end up in the hands of our youth here in the inner city. So what we need to do is have a comprehensive, unified, national gun reform, gun control in the United States. But one of the ways that we can make sure that we know who are the perpetrators of these gun violence is by having a gun registry, which there is one already in New York City since 2006, but that gun registry is only available to the New York City Police Department. What I call for in the State of the Borough address is to make this information online, just like sex offenders. So if you are someone who got convicted with a gun, what my gun registry would do is that it would make sure that when you are about to come out, that you register with the police department and local law enforcement, that you stay on this list for 10 years, and you can't be removed unless they'll reduce the amount of years for good behavior, but that you verify your address every 90 days. That you let the police department or the law enforcement agency, the local law enforcement agency, know your place of employment, education, and residence. I think that law-abiding citizens ought to know who among us are the ones committing these acts of gun violence or gun crimes. And, in the same way that we have sex offenders on the list, the same way that we have a different category for hate crimes, we should have one for gun crimes as well. And it's been getting a lot of attention. A lot of folks are interested in it. We're not talking about law-abiding owners of guns. We're talking about people who have been convicted of a gun, of having a gun on them. And I think that this is a way, again, it could be a deterrent, and it's a way for us to know, again, who around us we need to keep our children away from.
That's a very good suggestion, and I hope that comes to fruition. We want to name that the Ruben Diaz law.
Diaz Jr. law. We have a lot of folks have been, and I appreciate that. But in the city of New York, again, we just need to amend it to make it public and make it the information online. So we've been working with Councilman Peter Vallone Jr., who passed the initial law. Okay. Again, that law is only for NYPD, but we want every New Yorker to know. We've been working at the state level with State Senator Jeff Klein and Assemblyman Carl Hasty. and we want to see this on a statewide level. So hopefully before the end of this session, we can get something passed where people in the city and in the state of New York will be able to know. And then, there's an argument, well, what about, this being something where you punishing somebody too harshly? Well, you know what? Then don't own a gun, don't buy a gun, don't use a gun, don't get caught with a gun, don't do anything with a gun. There's no reason why anyone needs to have a gun unless you're in law enforcement anyway. And so if you don't want to be made public, if you don't want the spotlight on you, then stay away from guns.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
You're listening to Reaching Out. I'm Gregory Floyd, President Local 237 Teamsters. With me is our very special guest, the esteemed Bronx Borough President, Ruben Diaz Jr. And we were talking about gun control, and now we're going to talk about your support for public workers. I know members in your family are public servants, as you are. And all too often, public employees are attacked across this nation and in the city. I'm hearing from my members, they said, Mr. Floyd, Greg, we want to make sure that we're a viable part of this community, and we want to participate in the city, and we understand that the city has a financial deficit. But do we have to hear day after day that everything has to be balanced on the backs of the working people, and that people in general don't pay their fair share? What do you think about some of the attacks to the pension systems and public employee benefits?
Well, let me back up a little bit. You're right, and you're correct in that my whole family, I've been always taught to give back. And my mother's a daycare teacher. She just retired last year. My sister is a sergeant in the New York Police Department. My brother is a supervisor for the New York City Housing Authority. My father, who started out with providing services for senior citizens, is now a state senator, and I was an assembly member for 13 years, and now borough president for 4 years, for the last 4 years. And it's amazing how the public, the public workforce has been vilified. When you look at the city of New York and you look at the fact that we've come from the days of the 70s and the 80s, it was because of those individuals who work for the city who have been able to bring the city back. And whether they're teachers, whether they are working in the different agencies throughout the city of New York, whether they're police officers or working for the New York City Housing Authority, these are the people who on day in and day out, they make the city go round. They make the city work in a way where it's efficient. Is it perfect? No. Are there things that we need to do to make sure that things could be better? Absolutely. Are there people who spoil it, certain rotten apples here and there they do it with elected officials. There's some elected officials that spoil it for the rest of us.
Any group you find.
Any group.
Yeah.
But the reality is that when you look at those who work for the city of New York, what do they want? They want to provide a service, and they want to do it in a way where they can provide for their families. And it's amazing how, on one end, we are prepared to vilify them, or some people are prepared to vilify them and cut, their services and raid their pension. But on the other end, they're prepared to give away goodies and give away incentives to those in the city and in the United States who need it the least, whether it's those there are those on Wall Street or the corporate giants. We give them tax breaks, we give them tax incentives. We get, there's so much in terms of contracts that are given out. Look, in the city of New York, how much does the mayor and the chancellor give out to contracts out of the Department of Education every year? Billions of dollars, and yet they want to pick on the teachers of the city of New York instead of making sure that everyone is doing what they're supposed to do in order to have our kids educated as best as possible. The same thing goes for people in the New York Housing Authority. These are people that if you give them the necessary resources, you give them the respect that they deserve. What they would do on a daily basis is make sure that the people who live in housing have the services and the cleanliness that they deserve as well. And so it's going to be interesting in this mayoral election year to hear what the candidates have to say. We've experienced a vilification of public employees over the last 12 years. It seems to be like the fad. in some municipalities nationwide. But in the city of New York, I think it's time that we start defending those who help our city work in the way that it has, and has kept us in a position that we have been, and that's being the best and most beautiful city in the whole planet.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this segment. We're going to invite the borough president back, Ruben Diaz Jr., borough president of the Bronx.
Time flies when you're having fun.
It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.